Dallas police officer Amber Guyger convicted of murder this week and given a 10-year sentence. But was that enough? Let's talk about it right now. We're live on Facebook and YouTube for this Friday evening. I'm Elliot Francis. Thank you for joining us. Amber Guyger, police officer, Dallas police officer, found guilty of murder this week, a case that has captured the attention of the entire country for at least a week now, a week or 2 weeks, and it's been around for some time, and there's been a lot of opinion about it. We hope you register some of that opinion in here tonight. It's been a crazy week, but that case just dominated everything, particularly, not necessarily for the case itself, but particularly for the outcome of the case. And it was interesting because most people thought it would go one way. And in fact, it went completely the opposite way. For some people, it was extremely gratifying, satisfying, shall we say. For other people, extremely disappointing, particularly for the family of Botham Jean, the young man who was murdered. We can say that now, murdered by Officer Guyger. Going back to September 18th, September 6th, make that 2018. She was coming off a very long shift, from what we're told, at the Dallas Police Department, entered her apartment, or went to her apartment, going to her apartment, and as she began to enter what she thought was her apartment, the door was, actually her key didn't work, as she testified. The key didn't work. She pushed the door was open, and as she entered, she found somebody in what she thought was her apartment. She came to the conclusion that that person was an intruder, was not supposed to be there, and she fired 2 shots and killed him, and he died. Botham Jean, as you see there, the young man, a 29-year-old accountant from St. Lucia, originally from St. Lucia, just finished college a few years ago and was pursuing life as an accountant. And from all accounts and from testimony that day, was on his couch, as it turns out, eating ice cream that night when Officer Guyger appeared through his front door with a gun and shot him. Very unfortunate set of circumstances, shall we say, but we want to try and get some of the bits and pieces out tonight and get your comments. As we do that, remember, our phone lines are open, 443-505-7560, 443-505-7560. We'd like to get your comment. We've seen a lot of it online, and we will take it in chat as well as on the phones as well, and try and see if we can make heads or tails of this. I will tell you right off the bat, I am of the opinion that this was a horrible mistake. However, the murder conviction was probably correct. Whether or not the sentence fit the conviction is another conversation, which we hopefully will have tonight. But before we do that, let's take a look back at what started all this, what got this trial going, and some of the details in the upcoming trial. This is from ABC's Nightline. Take a look at this.
Last September, Amber Guyger, who'd been a police officer for 4 years, was coming home after a 13-and-a-half-hour shift. It was around 10 p.m. She lived in apartment 1378 on the 3rd floor. Directly above her in 1478 was Botham Jean's apartment. The St. Lucia native described by his friends and family as a ray of sunshine.
Botham had a love for everything and everyone.
That fateful night, he was home watching television, eating ice cream, when Guyger entered his apartment, saying she thought it was her own, shooting Botham twice, killing him in his own living room.
The idea that someone could walk into an apartment that's not theirs, to somehow convince yourself that that person is in your house committing a crime, and your option is not to back out of the house, but to shoot and kill them. All those factors were incredibly hard to stomach.
She told the jury she accidentally parked on the 4th floor and walked in. When she got to the door, she says, she put the key in and it just opened. At that point, she heard someone inside.
I knew somebody was moving around inside my apartment. I wanted just to find that threat.
She says she saw a figure move toward her. In court, Guyger demonstrated how she says she confronted the person.
I have my gun pointed, and I'm saying, let me see your hands, let me see your hands.
What were you focused on?
Him.
Why did you fire?
I was scared. I was scared this person's apartment was going to hurt me. And I'm so sorry.
And after days of a trial, yesterday, a verdict.
We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant, Amber Guyger, guilty of murder as charged in the indictment.
This verdict is for them. This verdict is for them.
But for Jean's mother, today after sentencing, that feeling of justice fleeting.
That 10 years in prison is 10 years for her reflection and for her to change her life. But there is much more to be done by the city of Dallas.
The mother there of 29-year-old Botham John shot and killed by Amber Guyger on September 6th, 2018. A couple of things here. We're certainly familiar with the many shootings of black men in this country over the past, let's say, 4 or 5 years. It's a phenomenon that has become deeply disturbing, particularly for the black community, but I think in people in general, because it seems to suggest that there is a problem. Maybe with human nature, particularly with some, and I say some, members of law enforcement, not all, in that men of color seem to be better targets than men who aren't. We've certainly seen certainly been familiar with all the cases that have come down the line, and certainly in contrast to that, the many other cases of men who were shot, men and sometimes women who were shot at the hands of police in a situation where they may be waving a gun or causing a threat, presenting a threat to law enforcement, and that threat is dealt with in a non-lethal manner. Many of those people are white, but there are many cases. I remember a case a couple of years ago. I can't remember the gentleman's name right off the top of my head, but he was found later to be emotionally disturbed. And the police had come at the behest of the family, who had called for the police to come and help calm the situation. When the police arrived, they opened the door, or at least the family opened the door when the police knocked on the door, and that gentleman came to the door, a black man, with a screwdriver in his hand. The police determined that was a threat, and they shot him dead. A screwdriver. Seems that use of force was a little over the top, maybe. I think a lot of people would agree. There's also the notion that many people will suggest that when police are in fact brought to bear and charges are leveled against police who have shot and killed people in a way that seems unjust, that police are never convicted. At least in Dallas, this is not true. Evidence 3, and this was reported yesterday, in the Dallas area, they point to at least 3 cases in the past 4 years where police officers were convicted. One in fact was black. The first one, Ken Johnson, sentenced to 10 years in 2017 for the murder of 16-year-old Jose Cruz. A year later, Officer Roy Oliver received 15 years for the fatal shooting of 15-year-old Jordan Edwards. Fourth officer, Michael Dunn, was indicted in June after he fatally shot a man in an area named Farmers Branch. That's in the Dallas area. So there is certainly history here that suggests that police aren't getting off scot-free. But in this instance, most people expected Amber Guyger's verdict at the end of the day to at least come down to manslaughter, maybe negligent homicide. Many people, I think, were surprised to know that it was murder. However, as was detailed in the case in testimony, Amber Guyger testified that when she opened the door, or when she knew that there was an intruder in what she thought to be her house, and let's stop there for a second. She thought that this was her house. Remember, she had gone to the apartment, mistakenly thinking that it was hers, tried the door first, the door didn't work. She entered in. By the way, that door was unlocked. One note to those of you who keep your doors open. I know that I don't. I don't think I ever walked into or had an apartment, had a house where I just left the door unlocked. That's just not natural. But some people do, particularly in some areas. This gentleman from St. Lucia, very common in areas of the Caribbean and many other areas where there's less crime. Not a lot of crime. People will keep their doors unlocked. He had only been here for a few years, so obviously he was unaware of not necessarily a cop walking through the door, but some of the crime in his area that he could be subjected to if he left the door open like that. So again, note is you know anybody who keeps the door open, you might want to advise them otherwise. Just not a good thing to do. Anyway, she thought it was her home. Tried the door didn't work, or the key didn't work, but the door was unlocked. She opened and walked in, and as she's walking in, she sees the intruder, and she testified at trial, which is probably what sent it in this direction, that she intended to kill him, and the autopsy bears that out. It was 2 shots to the body mass, what they call the body mass. So if you know any police are quick to tell you that this is a common practice, or at least in training. If in fact they want to subdue somebody, they'll shoot them elsewhere. If their intent is to kill, is to stop somebody, they're going to shoot for body mass. It's easier to hit than the head, and it just produces the desired results, so to speak. So it was her intent to kill him soon after she knew he was there. And so I guess the question arises, why did she want to kill him? I mean, yeah, okay, she thought it was her apartment. Mistake number 1. But could you assume that person was in your apartment for any other reason? If it's an apartment, there's maintenance people all the time. Well, not all the time, but under special circumstances. Let's say, for example, you have a toilet that's running. Water's running in your apartment. It's flooding the apartment, probably dripping down, causing damage. The maintenance is going to come up there. They're going to use a master key to come into your apartment. It's very, very possible that you could walk into that apartment and find them there. There's another number of reasons somebody could be in that apartment, let's say from management. Why not assume that instead of assuming that this person is there to do you harm, is an intruder? There are those who will say the visage, the appearance of a strange, unfamiliar black man to a white person sets off certain bells. And many people hold to this. There's actually been psychological studies done for this. And again, this is not necessarily to say that she hated him, that she disliked black people. No, not at all. Instead, there's a disconnect that possibly exists when a person encounters a person of color that they're unfamiliar with, and the stereotypes and all the shit that you've heard for your entire life about black people suddenly rises to the surface, and this person becomes a threat. Give you an example of this. One example is, just make sure we've got something going here. One example is an event or an instance that many black men are familiar with. So you're walking down the street with a friend maybe who also happens to be black. And this happens particularly to young black men. And there's somebody stopped at the corner getting ready to cross through the intersection, but they see you coming. They're coming for you're coming for their car towards the side. And all of a sudden, all the doors locks. Somebody hits the automatic door locks, locking the doors. Here comes a threat. About 95% of black men in this country are familiar with that, including yours truly. Would happen often. Anyway, for whatever reason, she came in and shot him dead, and the trial ensued. She was convicted of murder, and then the sentencing phase began. Within the sentencing phase, it lasted for less than a day. The jurors came back. The charge itself carried a possible sentence of 5 to 99 years. The prosecution wanted 29 years, which was the age of both of them, Sean, when he was shot and killed. The judge, or I'm sorry, not the judge, the jury settled on 10 years, thinking that was an appropriate sentence. And the judge agreed, and a sentence of 10 years was handed down to Amber Guyger. The feeling, the response to that, particularly from the family and supporters of the family, was in contrast to their joy the day before over the guilty verdict for murder. The 10 years was just not enough. Not enough. And people were upset. But there were some remarkable things that happened in the courtroom that day, which you may be familiar with, you may not be familiar with. So again, owing this and our thanks to Nightline for this background, here's what happened shortly after the sentence was handed down on the trial earlier this week. Take a look at this.
Can I give her a hug, please?
Compassion, grace.
Yes.
Whatever you call it, in a hushed courtroom in Texas tonight, we witnessed it. 18-year-old Brant Jean forgiving Amber Guyger, his brother's killer.
If you truly are sorry, I know I can speak for myself. I forgive you. I know if you go to God and ask Him, He will forgive you. I don't even want you to go to jail. I want the best for you. Because I know that's exactly what both of them would want you to do.
This unlikely ending, perhaps the biggest surprise in a case that captivated the nation for more than a year. Guyger, the former Dallas police officer, convicted of murdering 26-year-old Botham Jean in his own home.
When Brant Jean hugged her, a lot of emotion poured out of her. I think the healing process hopefully is starting to occur in her now.
That young man is 18 and he is a leader, and he should guide us in healing.
It's a rare act, easy to preach, hard to live. A grace we've seen before.
It has truly been an emotional day today, and really an emotional time all throughout.
Our Marcus Moore has been covering this case since the beginning.
You were in the courtroom. What was the reaction?
The judge did something I've never seen in 20 years plus of covering courts. She left the courtroom and returned with a little book. And then she started reading Bible passages and mentioning Bible verses. She said to Amber Guyger, I'm giving you my copy of the Bible to take into prison with you so that you can study it. And she said to her, you haven't done so much that you can't be forgiven. You did something bad, and in one moment in time, what you do now matters more.
Moments before, the jury that convicted Guyger of murder handed up their sentence after less than 2 hours of deliberation.
10 years imprisonment in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice.
Far less than the possible life behind bars the former officer faced.
Amber Guyger getting that 10 years in prison, some people in the hallway, they were outraged.
She's been 25 to 99. There's no justice for a man's life to be taken, and she gets 10 years. People need to be accountable for what they do. People go for drug deals, and they get 99 years. This person would never be able to have kids, would never be able to have a wife. His mom wakes up every day, and he's not there. She can't call him on the phone. She can't talk to him. There's no peace and no justice. It should have been 25 to 99.
Botham Jean's mother speaking with reporters after the sentencing.
If Amber Guyger was trained not to shoot in the heart, my son would be standing here today.
This case and trial shining a spotlight on how our nation deals with race, police transparency, and one officer's use of deadly force.
Here's another strange, just another strange thing about this case, if you will. The judge in the case, the judge was criticized roundly for her interaction with the accused, Amber Guyger. Just like Botham Jean's brother, who you saw there, in a remarkable display of forgiveness and compassion towards Amber Guyger. And I don't think anybody's faulting him for that. It's a remarkable moment in a courtroom where you usually don't see that. The judge also hugged Amber. In fact, hugged her and as you saw, gave her a Bible to take with her to prison and counseled her for a few minutes there. The judge was roundly criticized throughout the trial for a couple of reasons, and it's hard to say if those reasons are valid or not. But the one thing that we do know and that we did find out was the judge, as you see here, this is the judge with the Dallas Police Chief, Renee Hall. Judge Tammy Kemp and Renee Hall are sorority sisters. Renee Hall of course, is or was Amber Guyger's boss. There seems to be a synergy and a connection there that is probably going to raise a lot, or it did raise a lot of questions about conflict of interest. I mean, come on. A person on the Dallas Police Force charged with murder, their boss is your sorority sister, as you can plainly see there. Not only that, Judge Kemp was endorsed when she just ran for her judgeship maybe about 2 years ago. Was roundly endorsed by the Dallas Police Department. So many people have taken that to heart, wondering if there was some conflict of interest there. I would not necessarily go that far, but it bears watching. I told somebody this today. If I had to, if I was trying this case, or if I was a defense lawyer in this case, and I knew that this judge was a sorority sister for the chief of police, Dallas Police, the boss of the person who's being tried, who I'm defending, I'm trying to get off, and that she was enthusiastically supported and endorsed by the police department, I would have lost some sleep over this judge sitting on this case. As it turns out, there was not a lot of, didn't seem as if there was a lot of conflict of interest. What there was one particular area where the judge allowed testimony for the prosecution about a particular thing called a Castle Doctrine. Some of you may be familiar with it. Castle Doctrine essentially allows you the opportunity, if somebody comes in your house, to shoot and kill on sight without question. Somebody enters your house, you can shoot and kill them and ask questions later. Sometimes called the shoot and kill or shoot now, ask questions later law. And that was allowed in court. It didn't fly. Essentially, the prosecution was trying to say, okay, well, she thought she was in her house. So she thought she was in her house, then she should be able to use the Castle Doctrine, because she thought she was in her house. And if she thinks she's in her house, then she's going to use deadly force to defend it. That didn't fly at all. However, a lot of people even wondered or suggested that allowing that seemed to suggest that the judge was biased in a little way. Again, you can go back and forth on this, but it certainly bears watching. Again, in the sentencing phase, there was no indication, or there's no way that the judge can really have great impact on that. That's all done by the jury. But once the jury gives their recommendation on a sentencing guideline, and how many years they'd like to see this defendant go to jail, the judge does have some sway in it. In other words, if the judge thinks that the sentence is too light, they can strengthen it. If they think it's too much, they can lower the sentence. So they do have a little sway on that. However, she didn't exercise that. So yeah, looked like a conflict of interest, but probably not. But people are still angry over this case, and it's probably not going to go away. We did hear from some jurors today. Juror 21, juror 34. That probably doesn't make sense to you, but two of the jurors who sat on there, one juror said, I was listening to some people say they agreed with 28 years. Remember, 28 years was the original guideline from the prosecutor. The prosecutor wanted 28 years for Amber Guyger, 28 years being the same age as Botham Jean. Another member of the jury said, I can't give her 28 years. That woman, a black woman, oh, by the way, the jury was made up largely, we don't know the entire makeup of the jury, but it was made up largely of people of color and women. Okay, majority of the people in that jury. The jury 34, black woman, told ABC News that she understands some people are not going to be happy with giving Guyger a decade behind bars. said, I feel like this case is not like any other case, Juror 34. You can't compare this to any of the other black officers killing unarmed black men. Those officers that kill unarmed black men, when they got out, they went back to living their lives. Amber Guyger, ever since she killed that man, she has not been the same. She showed remorse in that she's going to have to deal with that for the rest of her life. She also took the stand in her own defense. Not always a good strategy, but again, they point to the jurors, point to the fact that she testified that there was the intent to kill. That once she knew there was an intruder, she wanted to kill them. Whether or not that intent was driven by the fact that he was a black man and not a white man. And again, no hate. We're not talking about hate. We're talking about a response to cultural upbringing, shall we say. Whether or not it was a response to that cultural upbringing is a question for a psychologist, I suppose. However, one other thing is true too. The shot, she had just scant seconds to figure this all out and wonder what she was going to do. And in those few seconds, she decided that she would shoot. Again, we were talking about body mass, shooting in the body mass. She intended to kill that person, and there was no question about that. And that also showed intent, hence the murder conviction. At the end of the day, I suppose it is a good thing all the way around, in my humble opinion. You may have another one, and if you do, we should call right now, 443-505-7560. But in my humble opinion, it is it should be a win for everyone. Let us say that. On one hand, people expected this, a white female police officer shooting a black male. Expected that nothing would be any different, that this person would get off scot-free. They didn't. The jury spoke, and a lot of people didn't like the murder conviction either. But the sentence seemed to suggest that the judge and the jury realized that this was just a horrible mistake. If she had to do it all over again, obviously she wouldn't. We think, we believe. And it is probably a lesson going forward for all of us in this situation, because we still haven't learned our lessons here. Police departments need to do more to counsel and understand what's in the heads of the police officers that they put out in the street, and ensure that it's hard. I know it's a hard job, but it gets even harder under these situations, and doubly harder if you bring in your own prejudices and biases. They need to work harder at separating those two. For the rest of us, it's a lesson in forgiveness. The brother of both of them, John, I think taught us all a little something this week when he unashamedly went up and asked to hug her, give her a hug, to comfort her after that just horrible situation that had happened to his brother. So the family is disappointed, but I think going forward, we're all a little bit better because of it. And we've all learned a lesson. And hopefully we'll take that lesson going forward into the next situation, because believe me, it will happen again. There's just no doubt about it. Before we wrap up tonight, couple of things. Well, before we talk, let's talk about next week. Next week, you'll recall Greg Conley from the American Vaping Association. He's going to be joining us next week for a Q&A session on vaping. There are now 1,000 cases of people who are ill from vaping-related illness. There are, I believe, 11 deaths now. It's starting to get a little tough to keep up with. 11 deaths. Greg's going to join us again for a Q&A just for you. So get your phones ready. No, we didn't get any phone calls tonight, but you want to get your phones ready, and just get in chat, because I know a lot of people have a lot of questions. A lot of people vape, either nicotine or even cannabis vaping, and it's a growing phenomenon. However, it's causing a lot of people a lot of problems, and there are a lot of questions, and I know you have some. So we'll have that next week, right here, 7 o'clock Eastern, here on Now. And before we go, just to, if we can, to mark the death of Diahann Carroll, actress Diahann Carroll, who died today at age 84. She was one of the well, I mean, she's a trailblazer. She's the first black woman to win a Tony for a leading actress on Broadway. Many of you of a certain age may remember her as one of the first leading ladies on TV in the show. I guess it was a sitcom, Julia, where she played a nurse, a single mom to a young boy. And before there was Julia, there's practically no black people on TV. I can't remember whether it was Bill Cosby first or Diahann Carroll, but Julia was one of those groundbreaking moments, particularly for black folks in front of a TV, that we had never seen that before. We'd seen mammies and maids and all sorts of things, but to see a professional woman of color was just groundbreaking, and we loved it. Years later, of course, she starred in Dynasty and just movies. My favorite movie, my wife hears this all the time, and I think you should see it as well. It's a film called Paris Blues, where she starred with Paul Newman and Sidney Poitier in the late 50s. Paris Blues, mark it down. But we just wanted to make sure that we recognized the passing today of Diahann Carroll, who, as they say, is a, did I do that right? True diva. Rest in peace. Anyway, we'll see you next week, Friday, right here, 7 p.m. Tell your friends, like us. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we'll be back here next week with another show. Until then, have a great weekend, and take care. We'll see you then.